Welcome to E-commerce with Coffee, a podcast powered by Amber Engine, where we share e-com secrets for brands over your favorite brew. We start with the caffeine and then leap enthusiastically into behind-the-scenes e-com insights that led to the success of our guests. I'm Nate Svoboda, and I'm about to serve you up the best. Let's get started. Hey, Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Appreciate the time. So for everyone listening, this is Ben Zettler. He's an e-commerce consultant, part of Ben Zettler Digital Media. So I wonder who founded that. Ben has had an expansive career in the world of e-commerce, from being the director of e-com to leading the social media strategy for a number of organizations. And you've worked with a lot of really cool companies. But before we dive into the content of our conversation today, Ben, you're a busy guy. I imagine caffeine has to play some role in your life.
As fate would have it, I have not had a cup of coffee in my life. I am a tea drinker, but aside from that, my wife has been trying to get me on the coffee grind, and it just is not something that I don't think is happening anytime soon.
Man, well, yeah, like if you haven't started drinking it, there's really no reason to start at this point. But
yeah,
I imagine there's got to be a little bit of caffeine in that tea, maybe. But really cool.
Of course, yeah, we all have our vices, right?
Absolutely. Well, Ben, I guess let's just dive into it. One thing I really wanted to get your thoughts on. So when you were working at Steiner Sports, right? It looks like while you were working there, you started your own, consulting organization. So you had a great career going, and still do to this day. But what was it that made you decide to focus more on consulting independently?
Well, I think it's a couple things. So even prior to my time at Steiner Sports, I was already in the middle of this process of ultimately building what has become my business today. It actually started as a business, an e-commerce company that I created myself 8 years ago, a company called Brooktide Sunglasses, which at the time was store number 41,000 or so on the Shopify platform. So not the earliest of adopters, but given that there's now nearly 2 million merchants on the platform, very much before Shopify's rapid growth phase. So, very fortunately, in a way, I always like to say that, I was very lucky to kind of, hitch my wagon to Shopify, so to speak. I've really seen how the platform has matured over the years, how it's grown, how the ecosystem of service providers has also grown. And so very quickly after starting that business, I started to work first with, friend of a friend that needed help with a website, friend of a friend that needed help with some email marketing, social content. And then it matured into really taking on what I would call real clients, people that I didn't know that maybe have come through a referral or something like that. And then that sort of set me on the path to the Shopify Partner Program, and then the Shopify Experts Program, and then even up until last year being named a Shopify Plus consulting partner. So it's just something really that kind of grew over time. And I've been very, very fortunate, especially with everything that's gone on in the last year with how the business has grown. And I think, to also go back to your question too, just about why I've kind of gone this path versus sticking where I was at. I think I was in some ways always destined for something like this. My father's an entrepreneur. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. His father owned his own business. So it was just kind of inevitable, I think.
No, absolutely. So was there anything in particular that you were hungry to do more of on your own?
I really enjoyed the process at first, and this is where kind of my consulting work started. I really enjoyed the process of helping folks to build their websites. That was really the first service offering that I carved out. And then as I got more proficient in what I was doing at Steiner Sports, because at Steiner, I started just as a social media manager. And at the time, I was actually the company's first full-time hire dedicated to anything social and digital. But that's really where the concentration was. And so as my work there also matured, that also kind of opened me up to what else I could start to offer clients. So not just building websites, but then, well, you know what, I really enjoy running social strategy. Let me offer that as a service. I really enjoy running email marketing. Let me offer that as a service. And so it's something that's grown over time.
Right. So, obviously I believe you played baseball in college, and you have a love for sports. You worked at Steiner.
I have to correct you. I didn't play in college. I played in high school. I worked for the University of Maryland baseball team as an undergrad, and then after I graduated. But I did not have the talent to take the field on the collegiate level. That's for
Got
sure.
got it. My mistake, but thank you for keeping me honest
That's
with
okay.
that. But so you have a lot of experience working with athletes. You've worked with
Yep.
Bleacher Report. You've worked with individual athletes. And I'm curious, what are some of the unique challenges that they face in managing their brands online?
Well, it's very unique. It's a lot different than your more traditional e-commerce brand. Certainly, even if you talk about the nitty-gritty management of content, you have to think about, well, most athletes, as most folks listening to this probably know, they're not all the ones, responding to comments and posting content up on their pages. So you have to be considerate of something as simple as a player's schedule. When he's playing a game, you can't be posting on their behalf because it's content coming from their perspective. And it's just, you just have to think about that. And I think in general, you have to be sensitive to all of the communications that go out on any of an athlete's digital channels. And also it's always a more unique experience. I think in some ways, not that anything is ever plug and play, but there's sort of more of a clear path that you may follow in working with an e-commerce brand in terms of optimizing email marketing and optimizing social strategy and optimizing their website. But with an athlete, everybody's got different initiatives. Everybody's got, this one's got a charity and we're trying to push more of that angle in terms of what they're doing off the field. Another wants to just share more content that they like. Another wants to interact more with fans. So it's really all about catering to the individual interests of the folks that you're working with.
Okay, no, and that makes total sense. So, in terms of social selling, right? People are increasingly buying on Instagram ads, Facebook ads. There's been this shift from just the social scrolling experience and sort of accidentally discovery shopping, and it's become more of a purposeful window shopping like experience on these platforms. Well, first and foremost, would you say that that's a fair way to characterize it?
Yeah, I would say so. And especially when we consider all the changes that are happening right now as we speak with regard to user data and data tracking and the changes to iOS 14.5 and how brands have to think about what types of advertising they're serving and at what point in the user journey. Yeah, it's definitely changed. I mean, everything is still in that sort of direct response type of mode. But I think as these platforms mature a little bit further in terms of how they integrate e-commerce into the experience, then it's going to become, like you said, more window shopping, more of a destination for users to go on Instagram and browse through what products their favorite brands are offering, but not necessarily engage specifically with that brand. And that's obviously a process that's been in play for about a year now, but is still, I think, not necessarily as common for the individual user in terms of like their actual purchase process. So, it's a work in progress for sure.
No, absolutely. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, what are some of the behavioral shifts we can expect from consumers based on like the Facebook buy button, Instagram checkout, and other shoppable social content where users don't even have to leave their feeds?
Yeah, and we're going to start to see that to be more and more common as users start to adopt that whole process, and as they just simply start to onboard. So as they start to load in their information, as they start to add a credit card to their Instagram account, and get more accustomed to completing a purchase within platform, then we're going to start to see that more and more. I mean, like Facebook and Instagram, for example, they give you the tools to push that type of messaging and that type of content out further. But even Facebook and Instagram as a platform seem to still be in very much an experimental phase in terms of how brands can take advantage of that from an advertising perspective. The way that they give advertising cost breaks and are still splitting out between certain placement destinations. Like they give you the option within the editor, like if you want users to check out on Facebook Shop, we'll divert up to 10% of the traffic and you won't be charged for X, Y, and Z. So it's still early, but I think if things go the direction that that these platforms want them to, then ultimately it could potentially be a windfall for a lot of brands to keep people in platform, but ultimately drive the sale, which is the important piece.
And so with social selling becoming, much more common, do you believe that companies should still be investing and continue investing in email marketing the same way as before? Or do you think strategies there should be adjusted?
Yes, they should. I will. I feel very strongly about this actually, that email marketing and text marketing, which I kind of put hand in hand with email at this point, are so very much a part of a foundational e-commerce strategy that brands need to have regardless of what's happening out there, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is sort of the legacy type of medium. It's the thing that users are accustomed to actually using. But that's just one piece. I mean, ultimately, that is your owned marketing channel. So even as users start to grow more accustomed to, using Instagram checkout, or checking out even I'll keep referencing that as an example, but really checking out on any platform that will implement, a direct checkout system. Um, that's still not information that you are solely kind of owning. And as those platforms mature a little bit more, then brands are going to get further and further away from that data. Like in the same way that you can sell on Amazon as a channel, but you don't get that user's email address, you don't get their opt-in, you don't really have a way to reach that user. I could see that happening. So it is important to keep in mind how crucial email and text marketing are to any e-commerce strategy. Again, because it's your own marketing channel. That is your list. That is your users opting into your content. And there, I think, is going to continue to be like your most highly engaged users, the people that want to come to your site, the people that want to interact with your content. They're going to be buying from you directly, opting in for your marketing. And that's going to be your most effective way of reaching people. And I don't see that changing. I mean, open rates, click rates, delivery, things that email inboxes are putting in place, like that certainly changes stuff. But again, like email, text kind of go hand in hand. And for every single client that I work with, regardless of industry, regardless of what their AOV is, regardless of what they sell or anything, I always see email and text. That is the number one channel, the number one revenue driver for them.
So in terms of some of the changes that Apple's made with the recent iOS 14 update, obviously that's another example, of a big brand having an impact on e-commerce, right? Apple as a company overall. So with these new updates, what are some of the impacts it's going to have on e-commerce marketing? And, is that going to have any impact on channels like email and text?
Well, there's some things that are already taking place already. And it's for the clients that I work with, it's been kind of hit or miss at this point. There have been some that seem to have been pretty strongly affected by the changes having gone in place already, and others where you wouldn't necessarily know. I think, of course, to some degree, everybody's been affected because you don't know what data you're not tracking. But it's been clear that it's more drastic than others in terms of actual performance. The biggest loss, and the I don't know if additional data has come out maybe within the past week or 10 days, but after the first week, Forbes put something out that said that 4% of users with iOS 14.5 had been opting in to cookie tracking, and that's really bad from an advertising perspective. I mean, we can have a whole another conversation about like user privacy and things like that, but in the context of e-commerce and data and how that relates to advertising you may run and the effectiveness of that advertising, 4% is terrible. But not everybody has 14.5 yet. And so, some users are still opting in. That number will rise a little bit over time. But even so, you don't know necessarily now, okay, user sees an ad, they click through, they go to the website. If they've opted out of cookie tracking, Facebook has implemented a few different ways via the API to more effectively measure what that user is doing anyway. But how effective has that been? We're in very much a state of flux as we have this conversation in May of 2021, depending on when people are listening to this. And so something to really keep in mind, to go back to what I was saying before about email and text, now more than ever, it's, really for any brand, think about what you're doing to get a user interested enough in what you're selling to get them to opt in to email and text marketing or any owned marketing channel. That's not to say that advertising is ineffective. That's not to say that advertising won't continue to be effective moving forward, because I've got clients that are doing just fine, and we're kind of dealing with the issues that are coming our way. But That should still be a piece of any strategy, but it really just drives home the point that you're kind of beholden to the changes that these platforms make, whatever the changes are over time. So in the same way that, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when it was easy to grow tens of thousands of page followers on a Facebook page, and the same could be said for an Instagram. And everybody was seeing your content, and there was no algorithmic feed, and life was great for brands. And then that changed. And then how do you reach people? Well, you got to run advertising. And so there's always going to be these changes that happen to third-party systems that brands rely on in order to reach customers. So, the better you can build those stronger relationships with people that you can more comfortably assume that you're reaching directly, then the better off a brand's going to be.
Right. And I'm sure that your consulting work, especially in the area, of Shopify, has really touched every possible area of an organization's digital or e-commerce strategy. But is it fair to say, right, isn't it ultimately like the product page that converts, given the fact that it's, the information the seller is putting on the page about the product, from, you got the high-res 3D images to the benefits and the bullets, and any added materials like care guides, right? Usually these are personalized in a big way to each product and the brand. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What would you say are some of the most important optimizations for these product pages, especially on Shopify-powered e-commerce sites?
So it's a great question. It's really going to depend on each brand, on a number of different factors. Because merchants at all different levels are going to have different priorities with what types of content they have. So that's a big factor. Like, what content do you have that you can showcase? Visual content, imagery, video. Like, what can actually go on that page that's going to be relevant to the buyer and to the purchase experience? And then what written content is going to be relevant to the product itself and is going to help to inform a user to make a purchase. When you take those things into account, that could mean, you're just filling in some detailed product description information, uploading things into a default media gallery, and then you're set. You're good. Great. For others, it's a little different, where even within the confines of a Shopify theme, you can build more of a landing page experience. So use a sections enabled page or a sections enabled product page, I should say, where you can build out some more dynamic content that's on that product page. So you can showcase, a full width video. You can showcase an image that is displayed next to some text content. And then other brands may have a totally different need where, it's something that's going to be custom developed, but that is going to showcase the content that they want to display in a certain, maybe more elegant way, we can call it. But all different types of brands at all different types of levels can win from that perspective, whether they are, whether they have a custom built site, whether they're using a default Shopify theme. The content itself is really the most important piece. And that's something that I think brands need to think about a lot. And I see this all the time, especially being in Shopify's experts marketplace, where it's a lead generation engine ultimately for us to get matched with merchants that need assistance with various tasks. And I'll get a lot of folks that are like drop shippers, for example. So they're pulling generic content from a listing through a drop shipping system that doesn't really have any branding element to it. So like the why of why somebody should buy this random thing from you versus buying it from an Amazon or from somewhere else, or from just some other company. And that's something that brands, especially folks that are like maybe starting their own Shopify business, like you have to be very careful or cognizant of how you're presenting your brand. Even if you are a drop shipper that is just starting a Shopify business and you want to get something going and you want to try to showcase some products, make sure that you're really diving into the details on product pages to incentivize somebody to make a purchase.
Yeah. So I'd be curious. I know on your website it says you've worked with I think around 200 companies. Do you know off the top of your head roughly how many of them came to you for help with Shopify?
I'd say 99% of the folks that I work with are on Shopify.
So then,
very rarely are they not, for sure.
Okay.
Or if they are, they're coming over from another platform that I'm helping them re-platform.
Got it. Okay. So then I'd be curious, what were some of the most common missed opportunities or mistakes that you saw them making before they came in and got your help?
Um, if we talk about like the sort of basic perspective, like basic, uh, shouldn't use the word basic, but we'll say the complete startup where they don't have a history of sales, where they really are just like a one man or one woman show, where they're just trying to start something, and whether or not they're drop shipping or they've created their own product, but they're really just trying to get off the ground. From that perspective, there's always a number of different things I see folks that they're not doing. The navigation on their site, making sure that menus are named clearly according to the products that you sell, and you're making it easy for folks to ultimately get to that product page, and you're not making them jump through too many hoops, or you're not distracting things with too many information related pages and not enough information about the products. Um, and then I think also on a higher level, even with brands that are doing 7 and 8 figures a year online, you'd be surprised how many don't have a very specific email strategy, or they're not really running effective advertising, or they're not doing any sort of conversion rate optimization on their website to assess, okay, we have 50,000 site visitors per month. Let's use the power of that to assess whether or not the menu formatted this way or that way is better, or the product page formatted this way or that way is better, or products listed in this order or that order is better. So I think what happens a lot, and part of the reason why a lot of folks choose to work with me who become clients of mine, is that I've had the experience on the other side of the coin. So, I started my own business. Great. I worked at a company like Steiner Sports. Great. So I had the merchant side experience of trying to build an email marketing program and trying to optimize a Shopify website, just again, from a different perspective, not just from the agency or service provider perspective. So I understand the struggle of when I see a very limited e-commerce team, maybe it's one person, maybe it's two people, even for a larger company, that they're wearing too many hats and they aren't really sure what to do, and they don't have very much experience doing it. So a lot of things end up falling by the wayside. And that's ultimately, not to give myself too much of a plug, but that's ultimately what I help brands do, is really creating a more cohesive strategy in terms of what they're doing with their website itself, and then third party marketing that they'll be doing.
Okay. No, and that absolutely makes sense. So, consumer expectations as a whole, right, have been changing a lot in the last 10 years. But I mean, in the past year, they've changed. I forget what the exact stat is. Isn't 10 years worth of growth in the world of e-commerce in the span of 6 months, the first 6 months of the pandemic. Yeah. Be curious. I find the growing preference to buy directly from brands pretty interesting, and it looks like a lot of your clients have taken advantage of that opportunity by setting up their own e-commerce sites. So I'm curious to know, do you see that trend continuing, and how do you advise your clients that want to have their own e-commerce site but still engage in some of these marketplaces?
Well, it's a balance. I mean, the thing that I like to think about is that there's just so many people in the world. Like if you really sit and think about it, there are just in this country, there are millions upon millions of people that shop on an Amazon, or that shop on, insert store here, right? And if you think about the percentage of the people that are in this country that are theoretically customers of yours, it's a very, very, very small percentage. So a lot of times, what I've seen is that merchants will overthink the idea that they're maybe oversaturating the market, or that they're, going to cannibalize opportunities between their website and namely, mainly Amazon, but eBay and Walmart and things like that. And it just doesn't necessarily happen that way. The thing that I'd like to use this as an example, going back to my Steiner Sports days. Steiner Sports ultimately was the largest autographed sports memorabilia company of its kind in the world. The reason why I ended up taking my consulting work full time 2 years ago. I'd been waiting for about a year to do it, but I had been told, we were getting bought out, and they told me to get your severance, be on your way. And so I stuck around for a little while, and that's how it worked out, which was great. But even thinking back to my days at Steiner, we grew a very close association with the New York Yankees, given the deal that we had to help to disassemble the original Yankee Stadium in 2008 and sell off the assets from that. And so we grew this reputation of being a Yankee company, which we really weren't. I mean, we worked with all major sports leagues, all major teams, all major players across all sports and all teams over the last 40 years. But, and this, I promise there's a point to this, thinking about the example of, there are millions of Yankee fans in the world. And as much of an awareness that Steiner Sports had for, being in the New York market and Yankee fans that buy from us, like, there's still millions that don't, still millions that have never heard of Steiner Sports before. And that's just, you just sit and think about the numbers of it. That's why, to go back to your question, I wouldn't hesitate too much. Like, if a brand is at the point where they've grown to a certain level and it makes sense for them to really branch out into being present on marketplaces, and they have the internal resources, that's another piece too. They have the internal resources to manage the process of being in those marketplaces, then by all means do it. And there's different ways to sort of work around that cannibalization that I mentioned. Like, if on an Amazon you're only offering specific types of products that you sell, or specific sizes, or specific packages, or you just have your whole catalog on there and you're casting your net a little bit more widely, and effectively using Amazon almost as a lead generation tool, because the people that you can turn into brand evangelists ultimately are the ones that do come to your website and that do want to buy from you direct. And I think it's a user experience question. Why would a individual user want to buy from a brand directly when they could just as easily go on an Amazon or something like that? Sometimes it's a user experience thing, sometimes it's a price thing, sometimes it's not. And depending on the stage of the business, I mean, if it's a growing business, you always have the easy story of, well, we're a small business, we're growing, like, help us by paying us directly, versus, going to Amazon where they take a massive cut of our sales. But even for larger businesses, the folks that are most highly engaged are buying direct for sure.
So for the brands that are just focusing on selling, direct to consumer, do you feel, and I realize this is a bit of a general question, but at least in your experience, do you feel like these organizations are branding enough, right? Like, we've seen a real big push in the market, and especially in recent years, for big recognizable brand personalities, right? Do you have any thoughts on that?
What do you mean exactly? Like, in terms of just like the outward communications of a brand, like, if they're being witty on Twitter, or like, what do you mean?
Well, in terms of, the organizations that really tried to develop that close relationship with their ideal consumer, right? They're, it's whether it be the types of lifestyle images that they put on their website, the wording that they put out in their advertisements, versus just kind of being an organization that sells a product.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, I think, to succeed if you're just selling like a product, especially where it's something that like other folks sell. Like, that goes back to the drop shipping thing that I mentioned before. And this is for everybody out there. Like, when I get the emails and questions about, hey, I just started this website last week and I have 10,000 products that I list through XYZ drop shipping platform, and I have zero sales, and I'm getting a ton of traffic. I'm getting 100 people to my site and I'm getting no sales. Why isn't anyone buying? Well, I have never seen a drop shipping business like that have success ever. So for everybody out there that thinks you can, there's all those examples that you see of folks that do the YouTube videos, and here's how you do it, and here's how I don't touch anything, and I just let advertising run on my drop shipping business, and I'm just sitting back and making money. Does not work. Certainly not like that. And so much of that never takes into account like the actual cost. So even if you're generating sales from a model like that, you're making such small margins. That's really not even worth your time to actually go through that whole process. So yeah, branding is really the key. I mean, even for the drop shipping businesses, the only way that you're going to sell something, and granted, I have a biased eye, but even folks that don't do what I do can go to a website and they'll say, "Oh, they're just drop shipping from China or from wherever." Um, Branding is everything. The words you write, the imagery you have, the videos you shoot, the content that's there. Even if it's not always as tangible as, well, this is there, and then they buy that, and then this is what the numbers were. It is so much a part of a brand's, a brand giving their users a certain experience on their website. And then also, now that I'm talking about and kind of going down this road, like there's things that brands should consider, I think, more often that they don't. And it's going to be more helpful for folks at scale. So not really when you're first starting out necessarily, but for folks at scale, to run like Google Optimize, even if you're not using like a paid tool, but running a tool where you can split test content so you can really assess, if you want to have a very simple product page with not too much information, you just want to give people the opportunity to buy, and then test that with the video content and all like the sections enabled landing pages, like what we talked about before, to see what leads to higher conversion rates. I mean, I could tell you what's going to convert better, but brands don't do split testing, content, and user testing and things like that enough, and they should be doing more of that. So because you have users coming to your site, like take advantage of that data, that information, of that, that's an opportunity for you to learn a little bit about user preferences, and they should definitely do it.
Absolutely. And, we've talked a lot about data, about, metrics that an organization should be tracking. And, these brands that are focusing on D2C, sometimes they feel inundated with data, right? Because they own their channels, they have access to all the numbers they want about their sales, about their ad performance, and more. But sometimes they get lost in this excess of data, right? And they miss out on the most important KPIs. So, ultimately, what would you say are the most fundamental KPIs that brands selling on their own e-commerce websites should and need to be tracking?
That's a great question. A lot of times conversion rate, there's too much of an emphasis put on there. Because what does conversion rate ultimately mean? I mean, I've had some brands come to me and say like, well, our conversion rate's only 12%. It's terrible. How do we get more people to buy from us? And I'm thinking to myself, well, 12% is higher than I've ever seen ever. So you should just be thankful and praying to the gods that, it stays that way. But there's so much more of a story behind like a metric like conversion rate than is worth really putting too much emphasis on when you're trying to grow the business. Because if you're not present in enough channels or enough areas, your conversion rate will be high. Because if you're only getting that high intent traffic, if it's only your brand evangelists, the people that are super engaged with what you're doing, yeah, they're going to buy from you more often than the person that is just discovering you from a Facebook ad and then is bouncing once they land on the first page that they're on. So I don't necessarily look at that too much. I like to see, again, I'm trying to think of this in the context of like, it's very different, the types of metrics that you'll look at for a brand that's first starting out versus a brand that is more mature. And there's just different things you would do to optimize that. But, on the more mature end of, what's your average order value? Are you upselling users? Is there a way that you can increase that average order value over time? And how has that changed over time relative to what people are buying, and when you're sending out advertising and when you're sending out email marketing? I try to keep it as simple as possible in a way. And I'm sorry if this is almost a non-answer, but how much money are you making? And how much money did you make last month compared to this month? How much money did you make last year compared to this year? How has that changed relative to the traffic that you had? So that's where conversion rate comes in. But how has performance changed over time relative to the different things that you've been doing from a marketing perspective? And there's no easy answers. To answer your question, there's no easy answers.
Fair enough.
Especially for brands that are first starting out too. Like, yeah, don't get so hung up on the example I used before, like I'll get inquiries from folks like, I've got 1,000 people on my site. I ran a Facebook ad and I got one person added to cart and nobody bought. So my conversion rate is 0. How can I get a higher conversion rate? Like, that's not really the question to ask. The question is kind of what you've been alluding to before of what's the user's experience on the site? And then what is that ultimately leading to? And that's the way to kind of frame the questions as users are growing. Then on the other side of things, going back to what I mentioned before about growing your own marketing channel, that's where I will look at what is the conversion rate or the sign up rate of, you serve a pop-up 5 seconds after somebody gets to the site if they haven't purchased from you before, or if they're not in your email list already. How many of those users are signing up? Is it 5%? Is it 8%? Is it 10%? Is it 1%? Are you presenting them with the type of offer that may be relevant to them? I usually like to see that as a really good indicator of relevancy, of whether or not the users that are actually clicking on ads and coming to the site are actually legitimately interested or not. Because like one thing I'll say, when someone reaches out to me about wanting me to run their advertising, for example, honestly, I turn away more folks than I will want to actually work with, just from a fit perspective, because people need to understand, like, you could send 1,000 people to your website from advertising, for example, and like maybe you spent I don't know, $10 on that traffic for the sake of the example. 500 are going to bounce right away, most likely. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more. All right, so 500 are left, and let's say 250 make it to a collection page. And let's say of that 250, 100 make it to a product page. And of the 100 that make it to a product page, maybe 10 buy, maybe 10 add to cart. And then of the 10 that add to cart, maybe 1 or 2 buy. If that traffic has any intent at all. So you go from 1,000 to maybe 1 sale. And so what's that 1 sale? Are you selling t-shirts for $20? You spend $10 to get there. You're not making any money. Are you selling something like a necklace for $60? You spent $10 to get there. That's really, really good. But then there's 499 other opportunities, we'll call it. We'll forget the people that have bounced. But 499 other opportunities for you to get users to opt into your marketing list, so that the next time they hear from you is not from random chance, from social ad buying or from Google ads. You can reach them directly via an email or via text or via another medium. So that's super, super important, because at the end of the day, when you're first prospecting these new folks, that, whether or not they have a high level of interest remains to be seen, but they're not likely to buy from you the first time that they see a Facebook ad and they've never heard from you before and they don't really know what it is that you sell. So completely cold traffic, you want to get them into that process so that you can run a welcome flow and you can have them learn a little bit more about what you do, and you can present them with an offer to make that first purchase. So I'm looking, I know your question was about numbers. Those are numbers that I'm looking at. How many people are signing up relative to the number of people that are coming to the site. Of those users, what are those users interacting with? What are their open rates on emails? What are their click rates on emails? How is that performing over time? That's the kind of stuff that I try to look at. Moral of the story is, at the end of the day, there's 1,000 different ways that you could potentially look at this stuff. And there's a lot of noise ultimately to sort through. And that's what I try to do with my clients.
No, fair enough. I mean, to your point, we always hear a lot about conversion rates, but I mean, even you just painted the picture. There's a lot more things that you need to look at. And I guess that's part of the benefit of coming to you and having someone help, and having you help them with their website and their advertising strategy.
100%.
We're coming close to time, and I really want to leave you with one final question. So
Sure.
for our listeners that are, maybe having to convince their leadership of the need to, relook at their strategy in these areas, what are some of the recommendations that you make to them in order to get the buy-in of their leadership?
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of situations that I'll get into where a merchant is doing relatively well and sales are good, compared to what they were previously. So things are growing, but maybe they're not Maybe they're not doing email marketing. Maybe they're doing email marketing, but they only think they're doing email marketing. They're running a welcome flow with a single email, and they're running abandoned cart emails out of Shopify instead of a Klaviyo. And they're doing some things, but they're not doing what they can be doing. Ultimately, when it comes to selling in higher levels of management, on whether it's working with somebody like myself, whether it's making a new hire, whether it's hiring another agency or any other service provider in some way, you of course are going to ask the question about, okay, well, if we do this, how much more money are we going to make? Well, that's always a hard question to answer. There's never any guarantee. But when it comes to things like, when I see companies that aren't doing email and text marketing, that is like a no-brainer, like get on that quick, because you should be doing, around 20% of your total online revenue, we'll call it, per year should be driven via that email and text process. That's if you're kind of firing on all cylinders through all channels. So, if you're not, then that percentage is going to be even higher. But ultimately, it's big missed opportunity that's on the table. And that's stuff that you can kind of extrapolate out for any individual merchant that I may connect with. I'm like, oh, this is the size of your customer list. This is how much your traffic is. And this is what some expectations may be. But yeah, I mean, there are so many companies that are out there where it's either, I used this on another podcast that I did a few months ago, talking about sort of the worn thin founder, like the jack of all trades, doing everything related to digital marketing, everything related to buying and product development. That's common that I see. There's also the worn thin staff member that is concentrated specifically on e-commerce or digital, but they're handling paid advertising, or maybe they're doing a limited amount of paid advertising. They're handling social content. They're handling whatever it is that they're doing on email marketing at the moment. They're handling working with affiliates. Like everybody's just spread too thin. So there's, I'd say, way more often than not, situations where more help is needed. Another set of eyes are needed. Again, this is not a commercial for me. This is like, there's a lot of different really great service providers out there that can theoretically help merchants get to that point. But these are some of the questions that merchants should ask, even if they're going to do something internal, to really assess what they're doing. Like, what are they doing with their email marketing? How effective has that email marketing been? How much of a percentage of revenue has that made for them over the last 30 days, year to date? What are they doing from an advertising perspective? What is their percentage of advertising spend relative to total revenue on the site? What's their return on ad spend for what ads they might be running already? There's always opportunities for sure to take things a step further.
Right. It's interesting, of all the conversations that I've been having recently, one of the common themes that I'm hearing is, make sure you have the people in your organization or on your team that know what they're doing and know how to do this stuff, right? Rather than just try to figure it out yourself and believe that it's just going to work out. So in that light, Ben, for our listeners, where can they learn more about the services you offer and try to get in touch with you?
For sure. So if anybody ultimately is interested in touching base with me, I try to be as open of a book as possible. You can reach out to me on my website at benzettler.com. My email is very simple. It's just Ben, BEN, at benzettler, ZETTLER.com. You can follow me on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever, at Ben Zettler. And I would be happy to talk with anybody that might be interested in having me help them with what they're doing on e-comm.
Fantastic. Well, Ben, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. I really genuinely appreciate your time. And hopefully we can have you on for future episodes and ask you some more awesome questions.
Great. I really appreciate you having me on. This has been awesome. And I'm looking forward to listening to more with other episodes that you have.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ben. Have a great one. That's it for this episode of E-commerce with Coffee, powered by Amber Engine. If you haven't gotten your fix yet, be sure to get more e-commerce brand secrets on our website at amberengine.com. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.